You're listening to Business Stories with Ryan Arcaraci, a podcast dedicated to helping entrepreneurs become even more successful. Let's jump into today's episode. All right. Hey, everybody. It's another episode of the Business Stories podcast with Ryan. And I like to break away from traditional episodes and talk a little bit about my passions in life. And one of those is music. And a few years back, I read a book called In Defense of Ska, written by Mr. Aaron Carnes. And Aaron is a music journalist, he's an author, he's a musician, and he's joining me today. I'm really excited because I loved this book. It talked about all the music and bands I grew up loving since I was a teenager and even younger. So Aaron's here, and we're going to talk all about that book and his life. So, Aaron, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you. So, everyone's got kind of a story into this music, of how they got into it.
hmm
And I think, I have mine. I'm sure you have yours. Like, what was your gateway drug into like ska music and punk music and all of this? I'm sure there's a story behind that.
Well, my gateway to ska was Skank and Pickle, but
Hmm.
I think the gateway to that was that got really interested in the concept of underground music in general and the idea that bands played, that there was a whole world where bands played in clubs and that they were not the same bands that were on the radio. Like
Yeah.
that there was like these two worlds existed. So when I kind of learned that there was the bands on the radio and then there was the bands that sort of played live at these small clubs, and I got really interested in that. I grew up in the Bay Area in Northern California, and even though I had a hard time going to a lot of these shows because my mom was very religious and she was really picky about me being able to go out, I knew who a lot of these bands were. Like this was like the era when Primus were coming up, when
Hmm.
Primus was still a club band, Mr. Bungle, and then there was a lot of like they were kind of part of the, at that time it was like the funk metal scene. So even Primus was sort of considered funk metal or whatever.
Right.
And then there was a lot of other bands like Fungo Mungo and Limbo Maniacs that were all, and so I was really fascinated with that. And in terms of punk, it's hard to remember. I do remember kids like giving me like tapes, like Dead Kennedys tapes or whatever,
Yeah.
but I don't know why I went to see Skank and Pickle live, but I know someone told me about them and they suggested I go see them live. So I went to a local club. I grew up in a town called Gilroy. This club was in San Jose, which is only like a half hour away. I went and saw them play. I don't believe I knew what ska was when I went,
Hmm.
but I do remember being told that this was ska and that I remember leaving that show being a huge fan of Skank and Pickle and being all about ska.
Yeah.
It was like totally a new experience to me. I had really nothing to compare it to when I
Hmm.
saw them. You know, 6 piece band, 3 piece horn section, really, really, really fast, high energy, really fun. I mean, I had seen stuff like Primus and these other bands, even though Primus is like, I would say a fun band. They had kind of in those years, in their club years, they had kind of a scary audience.
Really?
Like the people that followed Primus when they were still wearing clubs were kind of scary, and like because the whole thing too is like Primus sucks, you know, the audience would say Primus sucks,
Hmm.
and they would like be like you suck, and they would throw stuff at it. It was like really weird and like kind of this like kind of aggressive, kind of almost like, I don't want to say jockey because they were kind of weirdos, but it was just like kind of an aggressive energy to it. So,
Hmm.
and people would stage dive and it felt like a little unsafe to, like, you know, if you're like a young teen who's not really used to that world. But
Yeah.
I didn't feel that vibe at the Skank and Pickle show. Yeah, it was definitely wild. There was a lot of energy, and the band were doing tons and tons of stage diving at that show,
Yeah.
probably more than I'd ever seen them do. But it felt really fun and it felt like really safe in a way, you know. And I think I really like that. And there was a lot of like, this is the era of Skank and Pickle where this was their first bass player, Mike Mattingly. So he was kind of a clown. He would ride on a unicycle. There was props and there was weird bits. So I was just like, wow, this is so cool. I love that they're just funny and crazy and weird, and the music is really fast, but also like has horns and is interesting. So I was just totally blown away by the whole experience. And I pretty much went all in on ska after that.
Yeah. And then you started to get into your own bands, right? So how did that unfold? How did you kind of fall into being a musician yourself?
So I was already a musician, but we were not playing ska. We were playing, like, I was really into like the Police, which is, interestingly has like elements of reggae and ska in them. But
Yeah.
I really like Police, and one of my bandmates was really into like Rush. So we were kind of into a little bit more like music like that. Once I saw Skank and Pickle, I personally wanted to play that kind of music. So
Hmm.
it took a little bit of time for the band to shift in that direction, but that's where I wanted to go. And we did eventually sort of evolve into that. And there was a little bit of a member change that made that possible. And also just sort of getting everyone else on board with that.
Yeah. I mean, for people that don't really understand like the 90s and the scene, and especially where you grew up, I mean, you had Gilman Street and stuff like that. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure you were kind of involved in that arena too. Like, what was the vibe like for you back then at that time? I mean, to me, that 90s ska, that it was like third wave and it was explosive in the mid 90s. I mean, it was
Mhm.
really a big thing. Like, what was it like being in the middle of that as a kid and then being a musician on top of that and then getting involved with it more and touring and stuff?
Well, my experience was that it was a very fun and inclusive environment, but it was
Yeah.
also one that seemed connected to the sort of the punk politics as well.
Yeah.
Like most of the bands had some level of like connection to that, like whether it was DIY in general or sort of anti-government or anti-right wing sort of stuff, anti-racism. That
Yeah.
was all kind of there, but it was the shows were all like super fun,
Yeah.
super diverse people, super inclusive, and I don't know. I just like for me, I just got like goosebumps going to these shows because they were so fun and so like the way the music sounded in those rooms, the way it felt like, and I just like wanted to just dance all night long to these bands. That was everything. I mean, I went to other shows, punk shows and all that, and I liked it, but it didn't like fill me with that same energy and same just euphoria as the
Right.
ska shows did. That was just the peak for me was the ska shows. Like they just seem to have it all.
Yeah. Yeah. And now Skank and Pickle, was Mike Park in that band or was it?
Yep, that was Mike Park's band.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, are there any shows at that time that really stick out to you that just stick out in your head? I mean, those of us who have been to enough shows, there's always one or two that kind of stand out. Like what do you have any particular ones that stand out or maybe a story behind one that you can remember that's just cemented in your head?
Well, I do. So there was a club in San Francisco called Slim's,
Hmm.
and which is not there anymore. But it's the Slim's had like a lot of great shows. There was one. So it was a Skink and Pickle show there. This wasn't my first one. This was like maybe down the road a little bit.
Yeah.
And then there's another one I'll mention. But there was one Skink and Pickle show that was still in that first era. It was still Mike Mattingly, still like so it was probably like my third or fourth Skink and Pickle show, and they like the show got shut down because it got too wild, and the club basically like stopped them, and
Hmm.
Mike Mattingly was like kind of like ready to like fight them.
Hmm.
This was like so out of hand, but it was like I don't know, it was like wow, this is amazing. I remember that, but and he got it wasn't too long after that he got kicked out of the band.
Yeah.
um but I also remember I got to see Hepcat play at that same club, and that was like a whole new experience for me because that's a whole other subculture of ska.
Right.
That wasn't my introduction was that style, but I got really into that. And at that show, I got to see how like, oh, this other side of ska is like people that are dressed really nicely, are kind of cool
Yeah.
actually. Um, and the band on stage is like really cool, and they're like kind of doing synchronized dances, and the audiences are following along and kind of mimicking their dances. So to me, that was a really special experience to get to see Hepcat play.
Yeah, and I remember what blew me away about Hepcat when I was younger was there was a guy in that band on a TV show. I think it was like Becker
Alex.
or something.
Yeah,
It
yeah, he was
could
on
be.
Becker for a while.
And I was like, isn't that the guy from Hepcat? And he's on TV too. It's such an
Yeah, he's an
interesting.
actor.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great. So, I mean, so how did you transition from all of that as a young person into becoming a music journalist? Like, talk to us about that transition from being in that scene to writing about it.
Well, there's definitely a huge gap. It wasn't a direct transition.
Yeah.
I was into the scene, and it's hard to remember exactly. I was just, getting older, doing other things in life. In the 2000s, I wasn't really going to many shows, and at that time, I was just kind of like adjusting to being a young adult.
Hmm.
And at some point in the late 2000s, so this whole time I'd been interested in writing. I was writing fiction, and I was writing just my own stories and stuff like that. Um, I didn't really feel like I was getting anywhere aside from maybe from what I felt like my writing was improving, but I wasn't getting published, and I wasn't really trying. I wasn't really putting myself out there much, but I was feeling like I wanted to have writing be something more serious for me. Like I had just taken a creative writing class um, in San Jose, and it felt like really kind of exciting to be doing this. And then I think I had this idea like I should. What if I wrote nonfiction? Maybe nonfiction would be a way for me to like make a little bit of money writing. So I kind of just had that idea. Then so that led to journalism, and so I had no background in journalism. So I went to like just like a local like small newspaper,
Hmm.
and I said, "Can I volunteer to like write? Just so I can kind of learn how to do this." And they're like, "Sure, yeah, we can't pay you, but you're welcome to do that." And I was just going to like city hall meetings. I was going to like Easter egg hunt, like
Yeah.
community events, and where I would like take photos and do a little write ups. I was doing stuff like that for this newspaper just to get an understanding of how to write for like a newspaper. And then once I got a little farther, I got a little bit more competent. I reached out to the local weekly newspaper and I asked how I could get into writing for them. And they kind of made me go through this quote unquote internship program, which was funny because I wasn't in college, but it
Hmm.
meant I had to like kind of do the same thing. I had to volunteer for like 6 months and kind of learn the ropes. And then I became a freelance writer for them, and I was getting paid as a freelance writer. And then I was like building a freelance writing career over the next
Hmm.
few years. And that continued to grow and expand. Um, so some point in there while I'm a freelance and I'm writing almost exclusively about music. That wasn't even necessarily my intention
Hmm.
because like the first newspaper I wasn't writing about music. I was just writing about whatever local community stuff they wanted me to write about. But the person that I had talked to at the weekly, he happened to be the music editor.
Hmm.
And when I was giving him my history, I was like, it's basically clear that I had like a lot of history with music.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, you sound perfect." So I started doing music. I started doing interviews with bands and reviews of shows. And while I needed a lot of work and feedback from him in terms of the correct way to write as a journalist, I had a pretty deep understanding of music in general. Just because, even aside from my experience as a musician and being a ska fan, I was pretty like wide ranging fan of music. I loved reading about music.
Hmm.
I liked reading music books. I read articles on music. I read reviews. I really liked like and continue to like a ton of genres. So
Yeah.
I kind of already had this sort of like knowledge about music. So that really helped me like write these articles as I was learning the proper ways to write. I could draw from like understanding the history of music and stuff.
Yeah.
And so as I'm building my freelance career, it's mostly leaning in this direction because this is where my expertise lies, and this is where my clips are. My clips are
Hmm.
all music. So, and I occasionally get other stuff, but um, so at a certain point, I was like, I want to write a music book too. I love music books. I want to write a music book, and the thought was, well, ska music is the first genre that really, really resonated with me. I mean, I
Hmm.
liked music before ska, uh, and I kind of went through different styles of music that were kind of like my thing for a while. But I think when I got into ska, that one's the one that really became like my thing, and it really lasted a long time.
Yeah.
And it was the thing that my band played, and it was like So I was like, ska is like my thing, and I don't really see a lot of music books written about ska,
Hmm.
and the ones that do exist, they seem to really lean heavily into sort of Jamaican ska,
Hmm.
maybe to some degree two-tone ska, but everything after two-tone ska sort of becomes the asterisks. They're like, and then it spread,
Hmm.
they may dismiss it as like, that's just the stuff that kind of didn't go very well, or they may just kind of go, it's like a footnote.
Yeah.
Then it continued on in some direction. So I think the fact that the story of ska after Two Tone was largely undocumented in the sense of journalism,
Hmm.
that I was really drawn to that and wanting to write a book to really discuss that, because
Yeah.
that's the music. Even though I love Jamaican ska, I love Two Tone, the stuff that came after Two Tone is the stuff that I got into. That was the era I grew up in, and had a lot of positive feelings towards.
Yeah.
And for me too, I remember the bands. I remember what the scene was like and how it was really interesting, and it was musically interesting, and all the people were interesting. Um, but it took me a really long time to figure out how to write this book. I just knew I kind of wanted to talk about this thing, because this thing didn't really exist in the form of a book,
Yeah.
and it wasn't really like taken seriously either.
Right.
And so it took me a while to understand, like, oh, that's what I need to talk about, is that it isn't taken seriously, and talk about it from that point of view, which is why it became In Defense of Ska, because I wanted to like address the fact that it was kind of directly dismissed, and I was going to push back on that as I told the story of this era.
And what's interesting about it too is that ska has deeply political roots, I think,
Hmm.
at a time when it needed to be there, and at a time when it was really influential.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that, like the political ideology around ska, why it had that, why it needed to happen at
Hmm.
that time? And I think it goes back to Jamaica and some oppression that was going on there and things. And then, of course, you've got 90s ska, which evolved from that, which was a little bit different from the political side. But w talk about the roots of it, that you learned writing the book.
Well, I would say that Jamaican ska, I don't know that you can really draw a really clear ideology. I think that what you can say about ska from Jamaica in the late 50s and 60s is that it was a style of music that felt truly like belonged to the people in a
Hmm.
way that was kind of different and unique.
Yeah.
I mean, there was mento. Mento was like folk music of Jamaica. There was calypso, but that was maybe felt a little bit like, I think that originated from a different Caribbean island, and a lot of the times the calypso was used as like music for tourists and stuff. But and there was a lot of within like the actual people in Jamaica and the poorer neighborhoods. There was a lot of interest in American R&B and jazz, and then ska sort of became the local version of like those influences
Hmm.
mixed with sort of mento and just like their own sensibilities. So I think there was a lot of like pride in what ska meant to Jamaicans when it was happening.
Hmm.
So some ska songs are political, some are not. I mean, I don't know that. I think it's more just like the sense of their identity was kind of baked into it. I think
Hmm.
where ska really gets overtly political and intentionally political is in two-tone ska in England in the late 70s.
Hmm.
And the reason is that even though you have like several bands that are forming separately, you have the specials forming. Um, Specials form in like 77. They're called like specials, AKA originally, or actually there was a different name, the automatics. They take a while to form, because originally like the concept was we're going to mix reggae music and punk rock,
Hmm.
and it didn't really gel right. It wasn't until Jerry Dammer is the keyboardist of the specials, and he was sort of the leader of Two Tone Records.
Hmm.
He was kind of the visionary of this band, and he saw that, and he really liked, because reggae was very popular in England at the time, and it was also very political, and punk rock was happening. Punk rock was very political, so I think he wanted to sort of marry these worlds.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until he realized that the energy of ska mixed with the energy of punk more seamlessly, right? It made more
Hmm.
sense. And once you saw that, then you kind of saw the version of the specials that came out in like, their first single was in 1979,
Hmm.
Gangsters.
Yeah.
And so that's where that sound comes from. But his intention politically was it was very, very thought out.
Hmm.
Like he wanted it to be anti-racist. He wanted it to be anti-Thatcher. He wanted it to be pro-socialist, and he was very upfront about it. And it wasn't like an accidental thing at all. It was very, very intentional. And it was a reaction not only to Thatcher, but there was the National Front happening in England, which was a very overtly racist, anti-immigration political party. They weren't one of the top ones, but they were growing in popularity, unfortunately,
Hmm.
and they were becoming more and more vocal in England. And people who were supporters of National Front were becoming more vocal. And Eric Clapton was a supporter of National Front, and he was famously like has made some very racist drunken rants on stage. And one of them in particular, which if you read it word for word, it's just horrendous what he said.
Hmm.
It was so bad that it was like the thing that inspired the Rock Against Racism movement in England to take shape.
Hmm.
And the Rock Against Racism movement this kind of predates Two Tone a little bit, but you can kind of see this is the environment that these bands are coming up in. It's a lot of punk bands, a lot of reggae bands, a lot of other bands at that time. They're getting together and they're like fighting this sort of like racism, the National Front, all this stuff. And they're playing shows, they're having benefit concerts and stuff. And so Two Tone is kind of like, in a way, it's kind of like a movement out of that. Like
Right.
Jerry Dammers envisions the specials and Two Tone Records this way. And while the other bands maybe have their own ideas about things, they sort of come to the plate to be part of this movement.
Yeah.
So, so they sort of adopt it and they sort of own it. So the
Yeah.
whole movement of two tone or just ska, English ska in the late 70s is a pretty clear anti-racist, anti-Thatcher, all this stuff movement. And this kind of goes on for a few years, and then the band, most of the bands break up or kind of move on to other styles or whatever. England moves on, but when ska starts to sort of inspire bands in other countries,
Yeah.
and one of those countries is the U.S., but other countries are Japan, are all over Latin America. A ska movement happens globally, and it kind of comes off the back of two tone ska.
Hmm.
Um, in England, I'm sorry, in America, you have bands like Fishbone, the Untouchables, the Toasters. I mean, these bands are sort of taking two tone and sort of making it their own thing. In Argentina, you have Los Fabulosos Cadillacs. You have bands in Mexico. You have Tokyo Ska Paradise Orchestra in Japan. They're all doing their own version of what they hear from two tone, mixing
Hmm.
it with their other styles they're interested in. So ska that comes in the 80s and 90s and beyond, while it's not consistently political, there is that sort of touchstone, and that touchstone is two-tone ska, and it's like more important to the growth of ska than Jamaican ska is because two-tone ska is the one that really becomes the big global movement.
Hmm.
It was a top 10 pop music in England,
Hmm.
and it spread as like cult music all over the world in a way that Jamaican ska didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, Jamaican ska like really becomes known as being sort of the predecessor to reggae and sort of the predecessor to two-tone ska in a sense.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people look back at the artifacts, the records of Jamaican ska and stuff, and they're amazing. But
Hmm.
two-tone is like it really, and it establishes, I think, in a lot of ways, a base point for all the ska to come after it. And while like what some of the people turned it into is very different, I think there's still like some sense of like this is what ska's about. Ska's supposed to be commenting on politics. It's supposed to be anti-racist.
Hmm.
So even bands like Real Big Fish, who are pretty apolitical, they still like kind of like shout out those bands. So they kind
Hmm.
of acknowledge to some degree the roots of ska and its political roots.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's a little bit of resurgence in it Like with bands like, I mean, to some degree, a lot of bands are mixing that with punk, like the Interrupters, and but I look at bands like that to me were so influential with it, like Operation Ivy,
Hmm.
and I think I look at the generation of kids now and the music now, and I'm looking at the world politically, like where does it all fit in, and what is the young person's mindset now with this music? Are they, is it kind of the same as when maybe we were younger? Is it different now? I mean, what do you think is the sort of the attitude or the, I guess, the political aura around it now? I mean, what are you seeing, or what is your opinion on that right now? The world is so different than it was when we were younger. Well, we didn't have the internet to go to see. I mean, we weren't going online all the time, and you'd have to go and discover bands, and it was just a different world, and the political climate was completely different as well. So, what are
Hmm.
your thoughts on that? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean the '90s political climate, like the climate that Two Tone came up in, it makes a lot of sense how political it was
Right.
because there was a lot to respond to.
Yeah.
The '90s was a mixed bag because on one hand, the '90s wasn't a super political time, but I also remember the punk scene in the '90s was highly political,
It
and the
was.
ska scene overlapped with that scene.
Yeah.
Like, so there was a lot of politics happening in the ska and punk scene. Um, the current scene of ska, the bands that are active now, and the newer bands, they're all fairly political, but they're also not. They're like the younger bands are like bands that have like maybe people that are like millennial age. Like they're
Yeah.
not really. I'm not seeing very many bands that are like high school, early 20s.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm definitely do you see that definitely with hardcore and other styles, but with ska, it seems like there isn't a lot of like young bands
Hmm.
out there. So it's hard to really get a gauge on the current temperature. The bands that do exist, the ones that are active, the ones that came out post third wave are a little older, and they do seem like they seem more overtly engaged with politics than I would say like the '90s bands
Hmm.
did at the time. But yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting. So, I mean, and you've talked to a lot of musicians from that time, and newer musicians. Um, what interviews or discussions or stories stand out to you? You've talked to a lot of people, even on your own podcast.
Hmm.
Um, Anything that sticks out in terms of just the stories behind some of the music with the bands, or just, even your own stories, touring and stuff? Is there anything that kind of sticks out in your head in terms of just, the climate, the politics, what's going on now in the world? What kind of feedback or stories are you hearing out there?
Well, I mean, I don't know if this quite answers your question, but I
Yeah.
mean, in my podcast and my book, I got to interview a handful of members of Fishbone, and I think every time I talk to them, I always get amazed at the depth of their backstory, and
Yeah.
the depth of their story just kind of keeps getting deeper and deeper. And when we had Norwood Fisher on the podcast, I mean, he was talking about how connected they were to the hip hop scene in a way that I wasn't aware of,
Hmm.
that like they were pretty well known amongst a majority of the active rappers, and they were friends of and fans of them. Um, but they always got kind of discussed in a way like they were so different than the hip hop scene and stuff. But they seemed like they were um, they were all friends, and like they all appreciated each other.
Hmm.
That's one. We did a bunch of episodes with bands outside of the U.S., and it was always interesting to hear their story and their connection, and sort of what how the politics translated to their music.
Yeah.
We talked to this band called Dubiosa Collective from um, what is the Bosnia? That's the country.
Hmm.
Um, and very connected to the politics happening there, and but very popular there too. They're like a headliner. They're like a festival headliner in that part of the country, in that part of the world, excuse me. But I mean, there was like a story where like a few years ago they played some like government meeting. They got permission there, and they played like this sort of famous like anti-fascist song at this like actual like sort of what their equivalent of like a Congress meeting,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So they have that message very strongly in their music, and they're like putting it out there. Um, like we talked to, you know, we talked to Los Fabulosos Cadillacs, and to listen to them, and they're coming up in Argentina in the '80s, and they're like dealing with a lot of like really like messed up, corrupt government stuff at the time, and they're basically talking about how they're having to like deal with the police in a very overt, direct way, and they're
Mm-hmm.
very rebellious about it. And then they're also sort of commenting on sort of the changing landscape of the politics through the '80s and '90s and beyond. Like crazy inflation, like massive unemployment, all these different things happening. So they're sort of adapting to the politics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this band, Desorden Público from Venezuela, I mean, they're similar story. I mean, they're dealing with the adapting politics of their country and pretty much staying engaged with it in a very strong way,
Yeah.
commenting on it. So I see that repeatedly with bands in other countries. Like here in the US, it feels like a percentage of the ska bands are actively engaged in the politics, the evolving politics of our government. But in other countries, it feels like a much higher percentage are actively engaged in that. And they seem to be coming from a similar point of view, which is, you know, anti-fascist, anti-racist, wanting equality, these sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's weird. And you said you kind of had a religious upbringing, and I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you were like Catholic or what or Christian or
Non-denominational Christian.
okay, because I was raised Catholic, and I kind of went through my phase of rebellion with a lot of that. And I'm just curious, like, did the music scene kind of influence your thoughts around your upbringing and change your identity a little bit? But now, the more I study religion now and the more I get into it, I realize there's ideologies in religion that relate to music now.
Mm-hmm.
The anti-racism, the anti-misogyny, equality, all of that is taught in religion. But I think in the political landscape, it's been skewed, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
politically it's been skewed. There's political influencers that are skewing it. So I think young people are kind of like, they're not, they're believing things. They're not really understanding what they should believe. I don't know if that makes sense sometimes. But did you ever experience that? Did you kind of have that rebellious time in the music and you were kind of pushing away from tradition and looking for your own path? I mean, what did you experience as a young person through that growing up in that, religious environment for yourself?
I didn't really, I wasn't really rebellious. I mean, I
Yeah.
was great. I was raised in a pretty extreme, when I say non-denominational, that's what it was called at the time. But I
Yeah.
think it's probably essentially like what we're now referring to as the evangelical movement. So
Okay.
it's a more extreme version of Christianity.
Yeah.
And well, it wasn't highly politicized back then. I'm sure it's the same people who are highly politicized now.
Yeah.
That's what they evolved from. But for me, music it wasn't really about rebellion to me. I just was so I was so into music. I think what it provided for me was an opportunity to get outside of that religious bubble and
Hmm.
to meet other people and to talk to other people and to have a different take on the world, and
Yeah.
also decide of like, to see like some of these people that that were talked about in my church, like, there was a lot of like, it's gay is evil, that kind of stuff. And I would meet people who were homosexual and they seemed like perfectly fine people to me. So
Right.
these sorts of experiences sort of like cause a little bit of like dissonance in my brain,
Right.
and enough of them happen where you have to like sort of question the way you're brought up and the religion that you're taught as like, well, I'm seeing, because of my experiences outside of it, I'm seeing flaws in it. And
Yeah.
that's what it was for me. For me, it was an opportunity to see an alternative way to look at things, and an alternative way to view people, and just different people than I grew up with.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm curious kind of where you think music is headed, in terms of its, I mean, it seems like that we see these resurgences coming all the time.
Mhm.
And I'm curious kind of where you think things will go in the next 10, 20 years with AI, with technology involving shifting music, shifting artists, record labels, using AI. I mean, what are your thoughts on the evolution with technology in music in the next 5, 10, 20 years,
It's really hard to tell. I mean, the last 5, 10 years, I think there's been a huge evolution towards pop music
Hmm.
and sort of almost the blending of genres in a way that didn't really exist.
Yeah.
Um, there's still like there's still scenes and
Yeah.
subcultures. I mean, ska still has a scene and a subculture. I think hardcore has a much more fervent scene and
Right.
subculture than ska does. I'm not a huge hardcore fan. I do like some of it, but I think it's interesting. Like for me to watch hardcore has been really interesting because they are one of the only subcultures and scenes that where I'm seeing them sort of maintain the integrity of their scene while also experiencing um, a version of their music going into the mainstream
Hmm.
and going into mainstream culture in a way where
Yeah.
it's evolving musically, but I don't know, it's like they're still like maintaining the culture of it in a way. Like a band like Turnstile
Yeah.
has they come from hardcore. Some of their music sounds like hardcore, some of it doesn't,
Hmm.
but they're getting attention in a unique way. Like,
Yeah.
and there's a few other bands doing that too. Like I think Drain is kind of going there too,
Yeah.
but they sound more overtly hardcore. But I think like when I watch or listen to Turnstile and I listen to the way people talk about them, I feel like they're repping hardcore scene like totally, even
Yeah.
if like musically they're going in all these different directions.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. That's interesting. I mean, in terms of AI, I don't know. Like, I think that AI and creativity, I think there's a little bit of hype around what it can actually do, and I think there's so much music out there,
Hmm.
and there's so many experiences of music that's been created by humans that I'll listen to and see what's good about it, but not connect to it. And then why do I connect to some songs and not others? Why do I I don't know, like the AI is going to be able to create that thing that makes me connect to, like the emotion or whatever it is behind
Right.
a song,
The
because
human part. Yeah.
the human part, it's hard to identify what it is because there's lots of music that, and to some people it's very impactful to them, but it's not for me. But I can look at it and be like, well, I see what's good about it. I see
Yeah.
why other people like it. It doesn't really do anything to me, but this
Yeah.
song really does affect me emotionally. I don't know why exactly, but I've never heard, you know, the bits of AI stuff I've heard don't strike me as having any of that to me. I mean, not to say it won't get better, but I think there's a lot of hype around the technology all around. And I think some of it's coming from the technology themselves. I think
Hmm.
some of the fear mongering in a way it comes from them because
Yeah.
it's a way to get people to feel like it's inevitable. AI
Yeah.
is taking over inevitably. So you might as well like get on board with it.
Yeah. I
As
think
a
it make
right,
yeah.
as a writer too, I mean, I could see like AI writing is getting better, but it's also continues to lack
Right.
something.
Yeah.
And as somebody like I told you earlier, I'm working on a novel. Like there are deep levels of complexity when it comes to writing a novel that's
Hmm.
good that I don't really know how you could get an AI to do that. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not just simply like this character does this and then this and then this. I mean, you have to like really think about the character's motivation, their
Right.
flaws, and the decisions they're making and why they're making them. And there's deeper and deeper levels, and you have to really think a lot about it. And as a writer, you have to think, and then you have to adjust it, and then you have to spend tons of time thinking and editing. So
Right.
we'll see. I don't know. I haven't really bought into the hype so much myself.
Yeah. Well, I think you make a good point, like you talked about earlier, and I felt it too. When you're listening to music made by people, whether it's live or on a tape or recorded, even if there's a subtle imperfection, like the human element of it, you know, is
Hmm.
powerful. Like the way the guitar is played by a human being, like you can't replicate that. Um,
And there's an intention, like there's a reason, like even if the musician doesn't know why they're doing the guitar part,
yeah,
they do know that when they play it, they like it
yeah,
and they feel something from it. So maybe if they can't even explain it, but there's like something about the sound they
yeah,
like, it's meaningful to them. So they're playing it. AI, it doesn't, AI is none of those things. And yes, they are looking at like existing data to see sort of what has worked
yeah,
historically and maybe mining that. And that's why maybe there's that uncanny valley element where it like feels close to being good, but kind of misses the mark.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I look at bands growing up that to me, the reason why they were great is because there was such a raw human energy, like
Hmm.
Jawbreaker, Operation Ivy. There's just certain bands, Joy Division, to me that they had such a uniqueness to them, but also it was an underlying deep emotion behind all of that music, whether it was
Hmm.
anger or sadness or whatever. But you can't replicate that to me through AI ever. I don't think a machine can replicate that kind of emotion, but also communicate it in a way that's so unique and interesting. Um,
Hmm.
and I just don't think we can ever do that, with AI anyway. So,
Yeah. I mean, I would be surprised if it worked that way, but yeah, I'm not seeing it personally. Cause, and like I said before, humans make decisions for human reasons.
right.
They're not always like logical,
Yeah.
like why a creative person makes this creative decision is important, the
Right.
why. And there's no why with AI.
That could be a t-shirt, right? This could be a
there's no
t-shirt,
there's no
bumper sticker. Yeah. There's no why with AI. It's your next book.
I read this interesting thing too about AI too, that they said the big flaw with AI with creativity is there's no story behind the story.
Yeah.
Like all actual creativity there's a story behind the story, and it's a piece, and the story behind the story and the story are sort of the bigger story, right?
Right.
Like you read my book, you're talking to me about my book, I'm explaining the story behind the story,
Yeah.
and it all kind of commingles. With AI there is no story behind the story. Whatever
Right.
it generates for no reason other than it decides that these patterns make the most sense. So
Yeah.
there's no story.
Yeah.
There's no reason behind it.
Well, and I think some of the greatest artists and bands come from difficult times. I mean, if you look at like the Beach Boys with Brian Wilson, who struggled with a lot of mental issues, but
Hmm.
at the same time wrote some amazing music and created some amazing music out of his own personal struggles and his own story,
Hmm.
which I don't think, again, AI can't do that. But I think most bands that have created something amazing drove it out of some sort of pain or struggle
Hmm.
personally or as a band. So, and I think
I
that's
think
interesting.
too. I think too, like the way pop music has changed, and I think a lot of people could be really critical of this, but it's like there is like a lot of modern pop music. There's like the artists, and then there's all these producers and songwriters, and they
Right.
all work together. But I think that that process is still very human because you see like these people all get in the room together, and a lot of times what they do is someone will make a loop, and someone maybe the creative, maybe the artist or maybe another producer, they'll start like pumping out hooks,
Yeah.
or they'll start like coming up with lyrics. So they're doing all this, and while you do have this sort of like quote unquote committee in a sense, they're all like it is all coming from an authentic place.
Yeah.
It's coming the pop producer and the pop artist, whatever like thing is popping in their mind, that hook that they're playing to the loop is real. It's human.
Yeah.
And maybe you have like it's being assembled and all the people involved, and so it's not like a singular voice, but it's still very human and
Yeah.
emotional.
It's
Yeah.
collaborative. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to wrap this up, but you did bring up earlier that you're writing your novel. So I want to ask you as we kind of close this, what inspired it? What's it about? When are
Hmm.
you releasing it? Talk a little bit about that.
My novel's called Little Black Book of Death, and I'm in the first draft. I'm almost done with the first draft, so I can't really say when it'll be done because right now I'm just trying to get to the first draft, and then once I get to the first draft, then the real work begins. I got to edit it until I feel like it's worthy to have some other pairs of eyes look at it.
Right.
Um, it's a book about a character who is very obsessed with music, but the kind of music he's obsessed with is music about death, like death
Hmm.
music. I call it death music, but it's really not any specific genre. It's music lyrically about death.
Hmm.
So it's songs of any genre written about grief or one's own mortality or
Hmm.
whatever it is. That's the character's obsession. The character then learns that has a terminal illness and has maybe like a year to live, is what they estimate. And so he has to contend with his own death. So before he was diagnosed with a terminal illness, I think he really liked the you know, hypothetical death and how like this music, how emotional this music was, and sort of getting to spend time in other people's songs,
Hmm.
basking in the emotional elements of like somebody writing about grief and maybe their mother dying, and how emotional you can connect to that emotion and what it feels like, but then dealing with his own death, it's very different, and he has to kind of like deal with that, and he goes on some journey, and it gets into kind of a weird like surreal, like magical realistic sort of place where he's trying to figure out how to like save his life even though there supposedly is no cure for what he has.
Wow. Pretty deep.
Yeah.
Have you kind of different from In Defense of Ska, that's for sure.
Different, but a lot of music is still involved though. But it's, yeah, very different.
Do you feel like you drove that from your own sort of existential, kind of thoughts
Hmm.
and just kind of maybe, and maybe it's just we all go through it. I think it's age too. We look at, I mean, I'm in my 40s, so you look at like, oh, in a few years I'm going to be 50. Like, did you feel like maybe that character's a little bit of you in some way?
Yeah, it's a highly personal record. I almost said record. It's a highly personal book,
Right.
in terms of what the character's struggling with and what the character is interested in. I mean, I'm also very interested in this type of music,
Yeah.
and because it's so emotional. I think it's
Yeah.
just like sometimes you want music. Sometimes you want to listen to music because it's just so emotional and you want to just really feel strong emotions. And I feel like most of those really strong emotions are about death in some way,
Hmm.
because that's like one of the most emotional experiences we have in life, whether it's our own death or other people's deaths,
Right.
or even just the way your awareness of death sort of colors your experience with life and what that means, whether it's positive, like, oh, I should savor my life because it's going to be over at some point, or
Hmm.
how maybe it makes you feel afraid to do things because you don't want to die, so
Yeah.
you're not invincible. There's all kinds of emotions connected to it. So that's coming from my own thing, and then the other stuff, it goes into like the character's backstory about, they grew up religious, and they're because I grew up very religious as discussed before, but I
Yeah.
became an atheist in my early 20s, and I think when I became an atheist, when I rejected my religion, I became hyper skeptical of anything that was that involved any kind of like faith or any kind of like, you know, conspiracy or new age. I became highly skeptical of all of it. And I think some of that's because I grew up in an environment where it was like
It was pounded in
there
your head. Yeah.
it was pounded in my head, and
Yeah.
it was all like faith based, right?
Right.
So I went the other way, and I had like thoughts about that, like what does it mean to go the other way? Does it mean you kind of close yourself off from like sort of the magic of life? And what does that mean? So there's a little bit of that kind of like narrative in there as well.
Yeah. Like a little bit of like a nihilism or sort of a denial of faith in
Well,
a way.
well, I think it's more the character. That's where the character's coming from, but the
Yeah.
character's willing to give that up in order to like live.
Accept death. Yeah.
And so I'm exploring the idea of like what is the magic of life, and I'm kind of like allowing myself to look at maybe what if the world was full of magic,
Hmm.
which I don't think it is, but what if it was? And what would
So,
that be like for the skeptic
yeah.
to go through?
Are you still kind of that skeptic, or do you feel like you've kind of grown out of that or
I,
matured
I
from that or
I'm still a skeptic, but I don't think I identify. I don't think my identity hinges on it in the same way
Yeah.
it did initially. Like when I first rejected religion, became an atheist, I think I was like almost like one of those people that needed to kind of like disprove other people's beliefs
Yeah.
a little bit, just because
Yeah.
I was my own insecurity,
Right.
needing to reaffirm my own idea. I feel like much more secure in my own ideas and beliefs that I don't need, that it's fine for me. Like if people have totally different ideas, or I still don't like things that are faith based. And I don't mean that that's not just a dig at religion. That's like all the stuff, whether
Yeah.
it's like pseudoscience, all these things. I'm not a fan of any of that stuff. Um, and I do accept that people are that way, and there's not really much I can do about it. And I would prefer people if people were not that way, but
Yeah.
yeah,
That's interesting. Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah. This is a great conversation, Aaron. I appreciate this. So I want to wrap this up so people can learn more about you and get the book, the In Defense of Ska book, which I think is great. I think if you haven't read it and you're a fan of music, you're a fan of ska, even if like you don't know a lot about ska, but you're kind of getting into it, get that book because it'll teach you a lot. And I learned about bands I never even heard of, like the Selector, and I listened to that. I listened to them after I read the book, and I was like, these guys are
mm.
great, you know. So I love that there's so much out there to experience, you know, in terms of music and learn about. And thanks to the internet, we got a whole online world to find and discover music in. But
Yeah.
um, so where can people find out about you and get this new book if you're planning to? I mean, you're going to release it at some point also, and then where can they get the In Defense of Ska book as
So,
well?
Defense of Ska, you can get pretty much wherever you get books. I mean, it's on Amazon, it's on bookshop.org.
Yeah,
Um, if you go to your local bookstore or your local library, you'll either find it there or they will order it for you if you request it. And that's always a good way to get it
yeah,
because then you're supporting libraries and local bookstores. But bookshop.org is also a good organization because they donate some of their money that they from every sale to local bookstores.
okay,
Um, I have a Substack, Carnes. I think that's it. Um, I'm kind of updating a little bit here and there in my book. I'm probably gonna once I finish my first draft, I'll probably be doing more there.
yeah,
Um, that's probably the best place to like stay in touch with me if you're like interested in seeing where this new project goes.
yeah, okay. Well, I have a Substack right now. I'm not really active on it because I'm learning how to do stuff on Substack myself.
Hmm.
But I will have to go check you out there. But if you're listening, definitely go pick up Aaron's book, In Defense of Ska, Amazon or your local bookstore, wherever you find it. And I want to read your other book when it comes out. So keep me in the loop with
Sure.
that because I'd love to check that out. I'm an avid reader myself, so I would love to check it out. But thank you, Aaron. It's been a great conversation. I hope we can keep in touch. And if there's anything I can do to help you in the future, let me know. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure.
Hey, this is Ryan with the Business Stories Podcast. And if you're a franchisor, franchise consultant, broker, or just a small business owner, you've got to check out clienttether.com. It's an amazing sales automation tool that is revolutionizing the industry. If you want to learn more, go to clienttether.com and inquire within.